right here in this moment. I'm Chris Lockhart. That's Oliver Crunk. How are you doing, Oliver?
I'm really good, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Um, you know, we typically do the long format podcast for consultants saying things, and then we've been experimenting with sort of like these short, sort of bursty kind of one-off things. And in lieu of a really good name, I was just like, let's do some extra bits. And so that's just what I've been calling it. It's a stupid name, but that's really all I got. I'm not in marketing. So yeah, so listen, I wanted to sort of look, there's been all kinds of headlines, right, about layoffs lately. And like, I mean, just this morning, Microsoft took a big hit on the market because of their missed earnings report, and they're laying off 10,000 people and all this sort of stuff. And you see almost like a state of panic, right, on the LinkedIn feed. And some of these stories that we're hearing, right, the Google nightmare of you go to log in and just your access is denied. It's crazy. What's your take on it?
I mean, it feels particularly harsh, like the thing you were saying about people losing access. It feels strange for that as a Brit slash European, because we don't
Mm,
have that level of hire and fire kind of culture. Like you have to serve notice on people. Like employment law is very different, so it feels particularly harsh how some people are finding out, like on emails, or to find out by not being able to log in. That just feels incredibly cruel. Um, but I've seen a few different sort of reports on it, and I think whilst I don't want to belittle or underplay the individual impact this clearly has on people affected, this in the round feels like a bit of a course correction that's been overdue. And
mm,
I've touched on this a little bit myself in a post I've done today and one I did a few days ago. That, like, if you think about what happened during the pandemic, there was a huge hiring spree for all of these tech companies,
right.
lots of kind of investment, and the expectation that that growth was just going to continue, I think, is somewhat naive. So there was always going to have to be a course correct for tech at some stage, and it feels like that course correct is happening.
Yeah.
For those that are caught up in it, I'm sure it'll be really painful, but overall, I don't think people should lose their minds too much over this.
Yeah, and I think there was this thing, right? It's you start off, COVID hits, and then suddenly no one's in the office, so I think operating expenses go down basically, and whether or not profit or revenue went up, certainly the profit margin went up because suddenly you have fewer expenses. And
Yep.
you got to figure these guys that spend their time in spreadsheets and accounting systems, they know all of that, right? They get it, but for whatever reason, there was that massive hiring surge. We can't find anybody, and we talked about this a number of times,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can't find anyone, can't find anyone to do the work. And I think you're right. Over hiring, I think, was really a thing. In fact, I think I'm going to share a screen. One of our friends. How do I do this? Chrome tab. There we go. Um, there, all the tabs are just called LinkedIn. So it's which tab is it? I don't know. The LinkedIn one. Um, let's let's see if we can find
Is
the
this
right.
the
Here,
Tom? Is this the Tom Goodwin one you're going to share? Or
yeah, Tom Goodwin,
yeah,
right? So Tom Goodwin. Hopefully, can you see that? Is it up? Yeah, there you go.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
so our friend Tom Goodwin, right, put this out, and I think it's really fascinating because it's this chart that shows sort of where some of that over hiring was, right? And I mean, if you look at, for example, Amazon hiring almost 1 million people there, and yeah, they laid off a few thousand, but I mean, on balance, there's still a lot more people working in these companies than there was pre-pandemic.
Yeah. But
Kind of interesting.
I also, but I guess also the kind of world has changed around access to kind of credit. Interest rates have gone up. Borrowing is more expensive for corporates. It's
Mhm.
harder, to kind of just throw money at things. So I think, and then one of the things I've kind of called out in the 2023 sort of look forward that I posted today is ROI. Is going to be scrutinized far more. So where speculative R&D and sort of experimentation was perhaps not scrutinized that much, I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny placed on that sort of stuff now. It's going to need to wash its face a lot more than it had to in the past.
Right, right. I'll put this. Let's see if I can I copy the link to the post? And you can drop it in the chat. But I mean, I think when you look at that and you look at let's see, there's a LinkedIn, I think, sort of running tally of companies that are laying off people, right? And let's see if I can pull that one up here, just because I think it's fascinating, right? And it's sort of this running tally almost of companies. You'd think I'd be able to know how to use this thing here. Hold on. Is this it? Yeah. And this always shows up in my LinkedIn news, right? And I know you probably can't read all everything, but it's got basically a running list of all of the layoffs that are going
Mm.
on, right? And it's substantial. So I think it's maybe it is sort of right sizing, right? The
I,
workforce.
I also think the pendulum shifts between maybe the big tech companies and then people using tech in a kind of enablement sense, and by that I mean
Mm,
end user kind of organizations. And it feels to me like end user organizations have for a long time struggled to hire tech talent, whereas
right.
tech companies, they're the bright lights that technologists want to go and work for. And I think the jobs are still out there. It just they may not be as glamorous or as sought after roles as perhaps the roles that have been laid off. And so I think the reality is there are roles out there, but they may not be as prestigious. They may not quite have the same remuneration packages. But I'm pretty confident there are still an awful lot of tech jobs out there. It's just they will be in slightly different sectors or slightly different guises than the ones that have been laid off.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. I posted a thing I think earlier today about training, right, and sort of the need for sort of ongoing training embedded in the areas where you want the most skills. And I think that's a critical aspect of this too, right? I mean, you don't want to be one of these folks that doesn't take advantage of any of those programs that companies may offer in terms of training or learning and development, and then have stale skills be the reason that you're suddenly on the chopping block. So people are laying off. Let's turn to who's hiring, right? Because I think that's also an interesting sort of thing. So I don't know if you follow. There's a guy. His name is the Corporate Bro, right? And so at Corporate Bro, for anyone that is listening, is interesting. So he's been doing stuff for a while, and he actually he works in sort of like sales enablement and training and things of that nature. Um, he put together a Google sheet. I'm going to stick it up here. Hopefully, you can see that, and we'll make
Mm-hmm.
sure we have the link to this. So this is actually a gigantic list of companies that are hiring, right? And in what area are they hiring? And some other interesting stats, where they located, all that sort of stuff. And I think this is a living list. He put it out there for folks, and people have been adding to it. I think it's kind of fascinating, right? That like there is still opportunity out there, right? It's not all doom and gloom. And
No.
maybe it's adjusting your focus, maybe it's adjusting your expectations, right? All of those sorts of things.
But yeah, I guess it's like kind of Tom was saying, going back to the sort of Tom Goodman post, what gets the headlines is being very, I suppose, myopic about this and sort of looking at the negative. And, it drives more clicks, doesn't it? If you say something sort of sensational, like, everyone's being laid off, the
Yeah.
reality is the market is having an adjustment and people will probably have to shift what they're doing. And your point about skills and staying current, and I suppose balancing how much you're a generalist versus specializing in a particular sort of niche area. Yeah, maybe this is a time where you can sort of take a step back and reflect: is my sort of balance of technology skills versus consulting skill set right? Do I need to do I need to sort of reevaluate and pivot? And I think as scary as these times can be, often they can be, looking back on these sort of times, you can kind of make real course corrections. I mean, I remember the 2008 financial crisis for me was pretty scary because the consultancy I worked for at the time was largely public sector work, and public sector government work pretty much dried
Mm.
up overnight because of bailing out the financial sector. And so at the time that felt really, really scary. But then I went off and I joined an energy company, and my career kind of went down a different path. So sometimes these things can be the kick up the proverbial backside, so to speak, that sometimes your career needs. You can sometimes get comfortable somewhere, and it takes a jolt. It takes someone pulling the rug from under you to go, right, I'm going to go and find something new and do something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a fantastic point, right? And we've talked before, and I think for a long time, at least I've heard for a long time, hey, if you're in consulting, especially in technology, you really need to specialize, right? You need to focus. You need to go deep, not broad, right? And this, I don't know that this fundamentally changes that guidance, but I think it would cause some people to sort of step back and reflect and say, all right, if all I know is this, and that's now gone for whatever corporate decision that's been made. Now, where am I going to find that thing again, right? And now I really have to start from zero versus, maintaining. You don't have to be a jack of all trades, master of none, but master of none is often better than like a master of one, right? Or whatever, right? The phrase, but the point would be, maybe maintaining some level of awareness or skill set in other areas too, because you're right, you may have to pivot here, right?
And we've got a message coming from Mark Cooper, actually. So he
Oh yeah.
says, these are the best times to start something new because when you can make money in hard times, you can really make the money when things get better. And this aligns actually with something that I know Gartner say, which is winning in the turns. Have you heard this sort of phrase that Gartner says? So
Yeah.
it's like a race car analogy for those who haven't heard it. Like the place on the racetrack where you make up the most time is on the corners, right?
Yeah.
Putting
The
yourself in the
inside,
right
the
position.
inside track. Yeah.
Get hitting the apex and kind of clipping the outside edge of the corner as you kind of go out. And the analogy is basically like, don't kind of panic in a downturn. You need to be sensible about the investments you're making and career choices you're making. But actually, it's the decisions you make in difficult times which will then prepare you and give you good foundations for what comes next.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And Mark, I think is spot on with that, right? Because I mean, think of the career changes over time, right? That you've had, that I've had. I mean, in industry, out of industry, even within consulting,
Yep.
health vertical, the FS vertical, this, that, the other. Focus on technology. Don't focus on technology, right? And so you have to, I think, flexibility there, right, to be able to pivot from one thing to another. And I think he's absolutely right. I mean, you know, I think COVID, we saw a lot of folks sort of drop out of the labor market and kind of do their own thing, whether it was Etsy or like, for example, I know a really good guy, Phil knows him too. He was like, you know what, I'm just going to start, woodworking, right? And he just started creating things in the garage and selling them for obscene amount of money on Etsy. And it's like, okay, well, there's a business there, right? That it could just be a hobby, it could be a side gig, it could be something else. I think maintaining those, like, you don't have to dedicate 40 hours a week to that. Maybe you have a real job, but I think maintaining some of these skills in hobby areas or interest areas, I think can serve you well in times like this, because it may provide you an opportunity to pivot to something. Yeah. Is AI going to solve all of this for us, Oliver? Should we ask Chat GPT?
I think if we want everyone to stop watching this live stream, we'll
Start talking
continue
about
down
AI.
that vein, right? But I suppose it is a bit of a segue into some of the things I've discovered. So a bit of a plug for my newsletter that's just gone live today.
Yes,
Um,
yes. If no one has seen it, go out and get the Architect Tomorrow newsletter. It's on LinkedIn. You have a separate mailing list somewhere that they can give it to the folks there.
if you search for Architect Tomorrow under newsletters, you'll find it, or
Yeah.
you can find it from my profile. But I try and do it monthly, and it's often a recap of what's been going on the community
Yeah.
and a bit of a look forward. And one of the things that's going to come up time and time again, I'm sure, is AI. But rather than the sort of hyped kind of side of it, I'm kind of going a little bit deeper and saying, what do architects need to think about, when it
Mm.
comes to integrating AI into their solutions or keeping on top of things? And there's a really interesting online database called Futurepedia, which is well worth checking out, which seems to be an attempt to catalog the various new AI solutions that are coming onto the market. And there's some really, really fascinating ones. Certainly things that help with content creation. So I think there's some things for us to kind of look out for
Right.
consultants saying things in Architect Tomorrow, help automate some of the production of the content.
What are you saying? It's too slow? Is that what you're saying?
But there's something on there actually that looks like I'm gonna have to look at, because it looks like you can kind of give it a script and it will come up with a video for you, which
Yeah.
looks incredible.
Maybe
But I
maybe
know-
maybe that's better. Maybe we don't. We'll just have let's just have avatars talking.
yeah. So kind of I think that's clearly going to be a theme, but also the kind of year of constraints, 2023 being a year of constraints, and we talked about the hiring and the return on investment sort of business cases being scrutinized. This does feel like it's going to be a year of constraints. Tom Fairbairn, a good friend of Architect Tomorrow, he kind of coined that one on the latest video. But yeah, it does feel like that's going to be a reoccurring theme this year. Is maybe we don't have the freedom and flexibility that we had before. We need to start thinking differently.
Yeah, and obviously, as you mentioned earlier, right, less freedom without sort of an unlimited money supply, right? Yeah, interest rates where they are and things of that nature. I think it puts real constraints on companies. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
time to look at, I think, your career and maybe other areas that you may have interest in that you might want to pursue or what have you. So, listen, I appreciate your time. I know what it's 4 o'clock there, 5 o'clock.
It's nearly nearly 4:30 here in the
It's
UK. Yeah.
almost time to go down the pub. Is that it? Right? You just
I wish a bit more work to do.
yeah. Well, anyway, listen, Oliver, good to see you. So
You
hey,
too.
listen, if anyone is interested, we have full-length episodes at consultantsayingthings.com. Oliver has a podcast, Architect Tomorrow, right? There's the newsletter you should definitely check out as well. So we've got lots of content. And we talk about a lot of these things. So maybe you can check that stuff out. Like and subscribe, like and click the bell, like and subscribe. And yeah, appreciate it, Oliver. Thanks very much.
Cheers,
See
Chris.
you
Cheers,
around.
everyone.
Yep. Cheers.